So you've probably gathered that today is the 12th day of Christmas, according to Western Christianity, with tomorrow, January 6th, actually being the feast day that celebrates the revelation and theophany of God, incarnate as Jesus Christ, and also commemorates the visit of the Magi to the Christ child, a theophany being a visible manifestation to humankind of God. So after the positive feedback I received about the metaphysical exploration I did about our Advent Emmanuel song, I thought it might be equally valuable to do a similar exploration of the mystical and metaphysical meaning of the Magi in the Christmas story, as the first in a, I haven't decided yet, 2 or 3 part series, Who Are the Magi in Our Lives? In the following weeks, I'm going to be reflecting on some individuals that I review as modern-day Magi, in that they serve as stars for us to follow in our journeys to discover and embody our own Christ essence. But today we're going to focus on Magi in the Christmas story and metaphysically how they live and express and inform us. So as I began to research the Magi and what they bring to the Christmas story, there is a lot of information. I especially liked one article that was subtitled saying, "It's not what we know about the wise men that make them so intriguing, it's who they become in our..." Now you notice I'm using the term Magi because it's more gender inclusive, but every now and then the references that we hear are often to the wise men. We've changed it in our services to wise ones, so... Anyway, the thing is, what we know is that that statement is actually true about all aspects of the Christmas story. It's not whether it happened or if it happened in any particular way. It's what the meaning has become in our imaginations. As you recall, there are 2 Christmas stories, one in Matthew and one in Luke, that have been blended together to create the traditional rendition that we hear typically on Christmas in our churches and gatherings. Most scholars now believe that these stories are not based in historical fact, but rather they're stories developed in the Jewish midrashic tradition that reveal the spiritual truth that these writers wanted to convey about their experience with Jesus. The visit of the Magi is actually the focus of Matthew's version of the Christmas story, which begins like this. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay homage." So, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea is the sum total of Matthew's nativity narrative, with the addition of this Magi drama. The rest of our traditional story is from Luke, including the census requirement, Joseph and Mary's subsequent journey to Bethlehem, the no vacancy inns that resulted in a manger scene for Jesus' birth, the angel pronouncing the birth of the Savior to the quaking shepherds in the fields, amidst a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and proclaiming on earth peace, goodwill to men. And finally, the shepherds actually traveling to find the child lying in the manger and thereby giving witness to the Messiah's birth. Now, there's clearly a ton of metaphysical meaning in all of that as well, but that's for another lesson. This morning, we're going to focus on what Matthew focused on, the mystical and metaphysical meaning of the Magi in this Christmas story. Can you imagine a Christmas story without that addition of that sort of wonder and mystical aspect of the wise men coming from afar following a star? It's such an essential part of the story that we've all taken into our hearts. It's interesting to note that Matthew is also the gospel that consistently goes on record with Hebrew scripture references and prophecies, some 68 in total, to establish that Jesus of Nazareth is the promised Messiah of the Jews. Now, contrary to traditional Christian interpretations, the Matthew writers are actually doing prophecy in reverse, having searched their Hebrew scriptures for context and meaning to bring to the transforming experiences they're having with the life and teachings of Jesus. In other words, the stories they tell are not necessarily based on historical fact, but rather in spiritual truth, according to their highest understanding. It's like all fables, that it doesn't matter whether they're factually true or not. What's important is what is the message, the truth that they're inviting us to partake in. It's not so different from our own ways of making sense of things. We compare our current experiences to our past experiences. We filter it through our existing belief structures, and sometimes they end up conforming with, and other times they end up transforming our current perspectives on life and truth. So Matthew's drama continues to unfold, with the Magi meeting with an anxious King Herod I, having attracted his interest and sparked his concern with their announcement of a new king, Messiah, being born to the Hebrews. Herod learns from his priests that the Messiah was to be born in Bethlehem of Judea, as written by the prophet. Remember, Bethlehem is the birthplace and city of David, the preeminent ancient king ruler of Israel in the biblical imagination. King David was the be-all, end-all, and what was prophesied always was that any Messiah that was going to come to reestablish the kingdom that King David had established would have to come through the lineage of David. Subsequently, we had to get Jesus born in Bethlehem so that he could be of that lineage. And then Herod sends the Magi there to Bethlehem to find the infant and requests that they return to disclose his exact location so that he too could go and pay him homage. Well, after hearing the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chest, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And then, having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Now, our tradition typically has 3 wise ones because there were 3 gifts. Eastern tradition suggests that there were 12 wise ones. And the reality is we don't know, and it really doesn't matter. Both 3 and 12 actually metaphysically represent completion or perfection. So they give the same message. This warning that the Magi received was about Herod's true intention, to search for the child and destroy him. Joseph also received a warning that night from an angel who tells him to take the child and his mother to Egypt and remain there until the death of Herod, which Matthew explains is to fulfill the words of the prophet, who said, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." Now there's a whole lot more to the treacherous Herod story, but again, we'll leave that for another day. So let's all take a deep breath in and let it out with an audible sigh. So how many of you were familiar with that whole Magi story? About half. It's not one we usually hear at the Christmas pageants. We don't hear about Herod going back and killing all the children under 2 when we're celebrating the birth of Christ, but that's actually what his plan was and what he carried, supposedly, in the story, carried out. That's actually a mirror of what happened when Moses was born. So it very likely was added to the story in order to compare the birth of Jesus to the birth of Moses, both of them being rescued and saved. And then, of course, Moses grows up in Egypt in the house of the Pharaoh. So we see how these stories, that's what I was talking about, prophecy. Actually, the writers look back and say, oh, Jesus is like Moses. He's a leader like Moses. And so then they tell stories and make prophecies that align with the stories of Moses to point that out. So let's take another deep breath and let it out with a collective sigh as we begin to tap into our gift of imagination, which Fillmore describes as the faculty of mind that receives divine ideas and reflects their character to our consciousness. What are the first thoughts that come to your mind about the Magi and what they bring to the Christmas story? For me, I think they represent the universal impact of the Christ light breaking through into human consciousness. They traveled a great distance. They weren't part of the Jewish tradition expecting a Messiah. They were led by a star. And they also bring the mystical and magical elements to the story, the capacity to discern and follow an inner guidance. Magi, the plural of magus, has both Greek and Latin roots that are also the source of the English word magic. It's a term that was used since the 6th century BCE, before the Common Era, to denote followers or priests of Persian religions like Zoroastrianism. Today, we might call them astrologers. In ancient times, however, astronomy and astrology were part of the same overall study and science and went hand in hand with each other. The Magi then were individuals who were learned in both the physical and metaphysical realms. They were held in high esteem for their spiritual wisdom and sought out for their guidance. Again, what comes to mind for me are the fictional characters of Gandalf in Lord of the Rings or Dumbledore in Harry Potter. If you think about it, I started to say our modern references. I said, well, those aren't necessarily modern, but they are in terms of our literature, of how I view a Magi. Could be a Gandalf or a Dumbledore. When we metaphysically interpret a story, we seek to find ourselves in every element. Fillmore says that the Magi represent the wisdom we carry in our souls from previous incarnations. And that they're from the East represents that it's the experience and the wisdom we have in our inner consciousness, because the East represents the inner awareness and consciousness. The star they followed represents a subjective and not fully understood guiding light, in essence, intuition. It isn't all figured out. They couldn't tell you exactly where he was or any of that. They have this intuition that something momentous is happening, and they follow that. Intuition is a wisdom of the heart that is very much surer in guidance than the head. The star being, again, in the East, points to the guidance that leads us to an ever greater awareness of the spirit of truth within us. The gifts the Magi bring to pay homage to the Christ child, gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, represent, according to Fillmore, qualities of mind that are the inner resources of spirit. Gold representing the riches of spirit, frankincense, the beauty of spirit, and myrrh, the eternity of spirit. Others have interpreted the gifts as symbols of the Magi's inner dispositions. Gold meaning that they offered their virtues, frankincense showing them to be people of prayer, and myrrh representing their willingness to sacrifice. The outer gifts tell of their inner reality. What is hidden is revealed. Their gifts are perfect because they allow communication between two interiors. The hearts of the Magi reach out to the heart of the child. Metaphysically, we're called to develop our own inner Magi by learning to trust spirit and look to it for our understanding versus looking outward to worldly explanations. It's a practice that will cultivate in our souls a certain confidence in the invisible good. Meaning that as we practice viewing the world through a spiritual perspective, seeking and finding the good in and or our growth in every situation, we come to trust that God is good all the time. Which doesn't mean that every situation is good, but it does mean that good can always be found or created in whatever situation we find ourselves in. Living from this faith awakens the sixth sense of intuition or divine knowing, and it empowers us to follow the guiding stars that appear in our lives, overcoming our fears, our considerations, our practicalities and appearances, and all things to the contrary. How many of you have followed a guidance and had everybody around you go, "What are you doing?" It certainly says to everybody who quits everything they're doing and goes to ministerial school, it's sort of like, "What are you doing?" An equally important aspect about the Magi is that they are searchers. Even as they follow their guidance and look for the Christ child, they don't have the exact directions, and they can only travel by night and a tiny point of light in the sky. They get manipulated by Herod and become unwitting accomplices in a horrible slaughter of innocents. They rejoice at their find and present their gifts worshipfully, but then have to leave in haste because of the warning of the dream. Darkness and danger seem more a part of their lives than joy and worship. Their situation is often contrasted with the shepherds, who don't have to deal with a mute star, but instead are blessed with a talkative angel, who gives them exact directions to where the child was born. The identity of the child is revealed to them, and they're serenaded with a song about the meaning of his birth, and once they arrive, all is exactly as they were told. So they go off wonderfully to astound everyone they meet with their amazing news. Angelic revelation, joy, and proclamation seem to be the shepherd's story. I think most of us yearn to enter into the Christmas mystery, in essence, the spiritual journey, with the simplicity and directness of a shepherd. I have often prayed, give me a burning bush. Yeah, I don't know which decision to make. Show me what, don't we all kind of hope that it's just going to be revealed, like the angel's going to appear in the sky and say, go here. But more often than not, we find ourselves struggling like the Magi. But perhaps that's okay too. I'm going to close with a story that Henry Van Dyke told, and I have sort of adapted for this morning, the story of the other wise man. Artaban is a Mede and a follower of Zoroaster. He's seen the sign in the sky and wants to join in the search for the newborn king of the Jews, but his friends tell him it's a wasted folly. Then old Abgarus encourages him with realistic wisdom, saying, my son, it may be that the light of truth is in this sign that has appeared in the skies, and then it will surely lead to the prince and the mighty brightness. Or it may be that it's only a shadow of the light, and then he who follows it will have only a long pilgrimage and an empty search. But it is better to follow even the shadow of the best than to remain content with the worst. So Artaban sets off to join the other Magi, but fails to arrive at the meeting place in time. Because on his way there, he comes across a dying man. He thinks to himself, should I risk the great reward of divine faith for the sake of a single deed of human love? But ultimately decides to attend to the man with all of his skill as a physician, and the man recovers, blesses Artaban, and tells him the prophecy of the Bethlehem birth. When Artaban finally arrives in Bethlehem, Joseph, Mary, and the child have already fled to Egypt, and the other Magi have already returned home. He's given lodging by a young mother with a newborn baby. While he's there, Herod's soldiers descend on the village and begin their ordered slaughter of all the children under 2. In order to save this one child, Artaban bribes a soldier with a jewel he had hoped to give to the Christ child. Continuing his search for the newborn king, Artaban wanders through the ancient world for 33 years. Wherever he goes, he attends to the sick and needy, spending his wealth on those in need. Finally, arriving in Jerusalem, he has but one jewel. He hears they are going to crucify a man who is called King of the Jews. Realizing that this might be the child that he has been questing after, he moves to join the crowd as they push towards Golgotha. But once again, his journey is cut short. A group of soldiers is dragging a young girl down the street. She used to be sold into slavery to pay her debts. She begs Artaban to help her, and he gives up his final jewel, a pearl of great price, to ransom her. Suddenly, there's an earthquake. A tile shaken from the roof strikes Artaban, and he falls to the ground. As he lies dying, the girl he has ransomed holds him in her arms. She hears a faint voice, and then the old man's lips move and say, not so, my lord, for when did I see thee hungry and feed thee, or thirsty and gave thee drink? When did I see thee a stranger and took thee in, or naked and clothed thee? When did I see thee sick or imprisoned and come unto thee? 33 years I have looked for thee, but I have never seen thy face, nor ministered to thee, my king. And the journey of Artaban ends there. Now, the obvious theme of this story is that the universal Christ presence in human need often goes unrecognized as we search for the historical figure of Jesus or some religious aspect of that. But there's a sub-theme that tells us that by the search may be its own reward. The struggle may be the goal. Spiritual journeys are a struggle to awaken what's already within us. When did I see you is a question of immature consciousness. As long as you did it is the expression of enlightenment. Namaste.
Namaste. we've come now to that time in our service when we have an opportunity to practice some quiet moments of contemplation and meditation. So I invite you now to just get comfortable in your seat and close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. Begin to bring your awareness into your body. Feel your body sitting there in the pew, supported by the pew beneath you. Feeling the earth rising up to support you. And as you begin to take some slow, deep breaths in and releasing slowly, feel yourself with each breath becoming more present, arriving more fully in this now moment. You might quickly scan through your body to see where you're tense, if you're clenching your jaw or scrunching your shoulders. Just allow those places now to gently relax. And continue breathing slow and deeply. Feeling yourself relax a little bit more with each breath. With each breath in, filling up your body temple with beautiful, clean air. Seeing the oxygen reaching every cell of your body. And as you exhale, feeling yourself let go and relax just a little bit more. Today's daily word reminded us to give permission to our minds and bodies to rest and relax. In our culture of busyness and stress, it's so important for us to take even a few moments to allow our minds and our bodies to just rest. This is not wasted time, but rather precious, restorative time that helps us to get re-grounded, reconnected to spirit, reconnected to ourselves. And so as you begin to feel that inner connection with spirit, I invite you to allow your imagination to call forth the idea of these three magi following that star. Knowing that the magi represent our own inner wisdom, our own intuition, that balance of learning and intellectual knowledge with a spiritual knowing. And just allowing that star to represent that guiding light of spirit that we can trust, that we can always safely follow, knowing that light of spirit will always lead us to our highest good. And so as we prepare to rest for a few moments in the silence, ask yourself, what gifts are the Magi bringing to me this morning? Gifts of peace, love, wisdom, beauty, faith, as you rest for a few moments in the silence. These gifts that you have imagined are yours. So claim them now. And vow to yourself in this new year to follow that star, that guiding light of spirit that we can always trust. Gently begin to bring ourselves back to this time and place, we do so with our hearts full of gratitude for these gifts that we've received today, for this time of rest and renewal for our bodies and minds, for this loving community that supports us in our spiritual growth. And we say